Chapter 18 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How the Bishop went outlaw hunting. Then the bishop he came to the old woman's house, and called with furious mood, "Come, let me soon see and bring unto me that traitor Robin Hood." The easy success with which they had got the better of the good bishop led Robin to be a little careless. He thought that his guest was too great a coward to venture back into the greenwood for many a long day, and so, after laying quiet for one day, the outlaw ventured boldly upon the highway, the morning of the second. But he had gone only half a mile, when, turning a sharp bend in the road, he plunged full upon the prelate himself. My Lord of Hereford had been so deeply smitten in his pride that he had lost no time in summoning a considerable body of the sheriff's men, offering to double the reward if Robin Hood could be come upon. This company was now at his heels, and after the first shock of mutual surprise, the bishop gave an exultant shout and spurred upon the outlaw. It was too late for Robin to retreat by the way he had come, but quick as a flash he sprang to one side of the road, dodged under some bushes, and disappeared so suddenly that his pursuers thought he had truly been swallowed up by magic. "After him!" yelled the bishop. "Some of you beat up the woods around him, while the rest of us will keep on the main road and head him off on the other side." For, truth to tell, the bishop did not care to trust his bones away from the high road. About a mile away on the other side of this neck of woods, wherein Robin had been trapped, was a little tumble-down cottage. 'Twas where the widow lived, whose 3 sons had been rescued. Robin remembered the cottage and saw his one chance to escape. Doubling in and out among the underbrush and heather with the agility of a hare, he soon came out of the wood in the rear of the cottage and thrust his head through a tiny window. The widow, who had been at her spinning wheel, rose up with a cry of alarm. "Quiet, good mother, 'tis I, Robin Hood. Where are your 3 sons?" "They should be with you, Robin. Well do you know that. Do they not owe their lives to you?" "If that be so, I come to seek payment of the debt," said Robin in a breath. "The bishop is on my heels with many of his men." "I'll cheat the bishop and all," cried the woman quickly. "Here, Robin, change your raiment with me, and we will see if my lord knows an old woman when he sees her." "Good," said Robin. "Pass your gray cloak out the window, and also your spindle and twine, and I will give you my green mantle and everything else down to my bow and arrows." While they were talking, Robin had been nimbly changing clothes with the old woman, through the window, and in a jiffy he stood forthwith complete, even to the spindle and twine. Presently up dashed the bishop with his men, and at sight of the cottage and the old woman gave pause. The crone was hobbling along with difficulty, leaning heavily upon a gnarled stick and bearing the spindle on her other arm. She would have gone by the bishop's company while muttering to herself, but the bishop ordered one of his men to question her. The soldier laid his hand upon her shoulder. "Mind your business," croaked the woman, "or I'll curse ye." "Come, come, my good woman," said the soldier, who really was afraid of her curses. "I'll not molest you. But my Lord Bishop of Hereford wants to know if you have seen aught of the outlaw, Robin Hood." "And why shouldn't I see him?" she whined. "Where's the king or law to prevent good Robin from coming to see me and bring me food and raiment? That's more than my Lord Bishop will do, I warrant ye." "Peace, woman," said the bishop harshly. "We want none of your opinions, but we'll take you to Barnesdale and burn you for a witch if you do not instantly tell us when you last saw Robin Hood." "Mercy, good my lord," chattered the crone, falling on her knees. "Robin is there in my cottage now, but you'll never take him alive." "We'll see about that," cried the bishop triumphantly. "Enter the cottage, my men. Fire it if need be. But I'll give a purse of gold pieces, above the reward, to the man who captures the outlaw alive." The old woman, being released, went on her way slowly, but it might have been noticed that the farther she got away from the company and the nearer to the edge of the woods, the swifter and straighter grew her pace. Once inside the shelter of the forest, she broke into a run of surprising swiftness. "Gadzooks!" exclaimed Little John, who presently spied her. "Who comes here? Never saw I witch or woman run so fast. Methinks I'll send an arrow close over her head to see which it is." "Oh, hold your hand, panted the supposed woman. "'Tis I, Robin Hood. Summon the yeoman and return with me speedily. We have still another score to settle with my lord of Hereford." When Little John could catch his breath from laughing, he winded his horn. "Now, Mistress Robin," quoth he, grinning, "lead on. We'll be close to your heels." Meanwhile, back at the widow's cottage, the bishop was growing more furious every moment. For all his bold words he dared not fire the house, and the sturdy door had thus far resisted all his men's efforts. "Break it down," he shouted, "and let me soon see who will fetch out that traitor, Robin Hood." At last the door crashed in and the men stood guard on the threshold, but not one dared enter for fear a sharp arrow should meet him halfway. "Here he is," cried one keen-eyed fellow, peering in. "I see him in the corner by the cupboard. Shall we slay him with our pikes?" "Nay," said the bishop, "take him alive if you can. We'll make the biggest public hanging of this that the shire ever beheld." But the joy of the bishop over his capture was short-lived. Down the road came striding the shabby figure of the old woman who had helped him set the trap, and very wrathy was she when she saw that the cottage door had been battered in. "Stand by, you lazy rascals!" she called to the soldiers. "May all the devils catch ye for hurting an old woman's hut. Stand by, I say." "Hold your tongue," ordered the bishop. "These are my men and carrying out my orders."
"God mercy," swore the beldame harshly. "Things have come to a pretty pass when our homes may be treated like common goals. Couldn't all your men catch one poor forester without this ado? Come, clear out, you and your robber, on the instant, or I'll curse every mother's son of ye, eating and drinking and sleeping."
"Seize on the hag," shouted the bishop as soon as he could get in a word. "We'll see about a witch's cursing. Back to town she shall go, alongside of Robin Hood."
"Not so fast, your worship,"
she retorted, clapping her hands. And at the signal a goodly array of greenwood men sprang forth from all sides of the cottage, with bows drawn back threateningly. The bishop saw that his men were trapped again, for they dared not stir. Natheless, he determined to make a fight for it. "If one of you but budge an inch toward me, you rascals," he cried, "it shall sound the death of your master Robin Hood. My men have him here under their pikes, and I shall command them to kill him without mercy." "Faith, I should like to see the Robin you have caught," said a clear voice from under the widow's cape, and the outlaw chief stood forth with bared head, smilingly. "Here am I, my lord, in no wise imperiled by your men's fierce pikes. So let us see whom you have been guarding so well." The old woman who, in the garb of Robin Hood, had been lying quiet in the cottage through all the uproar, jumped up nimbly at this. In the bald absurdity of her disguise she came to the doorway and bowed to the bishop.
"Give you good den, my lord bishop," she piped in a shrill voice. "And what does your grace at my humble door? Do you come to bless me and give me alms?"
"Aye, that does he," answered Robin. "We shall see if his saddlebags contain enough to pay you for that battered door." "Now, by all the saints," began the bishop. "Take care, they are all watching you," interrupted Robin, "so name them not upon your unchurchly lips. But I will trouble you to hand over that purse of gold you had saved to pay for my head." "I'll see you hanged first," raged the bishop, stating no more than what would have been so, if he could do the ordering of things. "Have at them, my men, and hew them down in their tracks." "Hold!" retorted Robin. "See how we have you at our mercy." And aiming a sudden shaft, he shot so close to the bishop's head that it carried away both his hat and the skull cap which he always wore, leaving him quite bald. The prelate turned as white as his shiny head and clutched wildly at his ears. He thought himself dead almost. "Help! Murder!" he gasped. "Do not shoot again. Here's your purse of gold." And without waiting for further parley, he fairly bolted down the road. His men being left leaderless, had nothing for it but to retreat after him, which they did in sullen order, covered by the bows of the yeomen. And thus ended the Bishop of Hereford's great outlaw hunt in the forest. So ends Chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How the Sheriff held another shooting match. To tell the truth, I'm well informed, yon match it is a wile. The Sheriff, I know, devises this, us archers to beguile. Now the sheriff was so greatly troubled in heart over the growing power of Robin Hood that he did a very foolish thing. He went to London town to lay his troubles before the king and get another force of troops to cope with the outlaws. King Richard was not yet returned from the Holy Land, but Prince John heard him with scorn. "Pooh," said he, shrugging his shoulders, "what have I to do with all this? Art thou not sheriff for me? The law is in force to take thy course of them that injure thee. Go, get thee gone, and by thyself devise some tricking game to trap these rebels, and never let me see thy face at court again until thou hast a better tale to tell." So away went the sheriff in sorrier pass than ever, and cudgelled his brain on the way home for some plan of action. His daughter met him on his return and saw at once that he had been on a poor mission. She was minded to upbraid him when she learned what he had told the prince, but the words of the latter started her to thinking afresh. I have it," she exclaimed at length. "Why should we not hold another shooting match? 'Tis fair year, as you know, and another tourney will be expected. Now we will proclaim a general amnesty, as did King Harry himself, and say that the field is open and unmolested to all comers. Belike Robin Hood's men will be tempted to twang the bow, and then—" "And then," said the sheriff, jumping up with alacrity, "we shall see on which side of the gate they stop overnight." So the sheriff lost no time in proclaiming a tourney, to be held that same fall at the fair. It was open to all comers, said the proclamation, and none should be molested in their going and coming. Furthermore, an arrow with a golden head and shaft of silver white should be given to the winner, who would be heralded abroad as the finest archer in all the north country. Also, many rich prizes were to be given to other clever archers. These tidings came in due course to Robin Hood, under the greenwood tree, and fired his impetuous spirit. "Come prepare ye, my merry men all," quoth he, "and we'll go to the fair and take some part in this sport." With that stepped forth the merry cobbler, David of Doncaster. "Master," quoth he, "be ruled by me and stir not from the greenwood. To tell the truth, I'm well informed yon match is naught but a trap. I know the sheriff has devised it to beguile us archers into some treachery." "That word savors of the coward," replied Robin, "and pleases me not. Let come what will, I'll try my skill at that same archery." Then up spoke Little John and said, "Come, listen to me how it shall be that we will not be discovered. Our mantles all of Lincoln green behind us we will leave. We'll dress us all so several, they shall not us perceive. One shall wear white, another red, one yellow, another blue. Thus in disguise to the exercise we'll go whatever ensue." This advice met with general favor from the adventurous fellows, and they lost no time in putting it into practice. Maid Marian and Mistress Dale, assisted by Friar Tuck, prepared some vari-colored costumes, and 'gainst the fair day had fitted out the 70 men till you would never have taken them for other than villagers decked for the holiday. And forth went they from the greenwood, with hearts all firm and stout, resolved to meet the sheriff's men and have a merry bout. Along the highway they fell in with many other bold fellows from the countryside, going with their ruddy-cheeked lasses toward the wide open gates of Nottingham. So in through the gates trooped the whole gay company, Robin's men behaving as awkwardly and laughing and talking as noisily as the rest, while the sheriff's scowling men-at-arms stood round about and sought to find one who looked like a forester, but without avail. The herald now set forth the terms of the contest, as on former occasions, and the shooting presently began. Robin had chosen 5 of his men to shoot with him, and the rest were to mingle with the crowd and also watch the gates. These 5 were Little John, Will Scarlet, Will Stuteley, Much, and Allan a Dale. The other competitors made a brave showing on the first round, especially Gilbert of the White Hand, who was present and never shot better. The contest later narrowed down between Gilbert and Robin, but at the first lead, when the butts were struck so truly by various well-known archers, the sheriff was in doubt whether to feel glad or sorry. He was glad to see such skill, but sorry that the outlaws were not in it. Some said if Robin Hood were here, and all his men to boot, sure none of them could pass these men, so bravely do they shoot. "Aye," quoth the sheriff, and scratched his head. "I thought he would be here. I thought he would, but though he's bold, he durst not now appear." This word was privately brought to Robin by David of Doncaster, and the saying vexed him sorely, but he bit his lip in silence. "Ere long," he thought to himself, "we shall see whether Robin Hood be here or not." Meantime the shooting had been going forward, and Robin's men had done so well that the air was filled with shouts. One cried Blue Jacket, another cried Brown, and a third cried Brave Yellow, but the fourth man said, "Yon man in red in this place has no fellow." For that was Robin Hood himself, for he was clothed in red. At every shot the prize he got, for he was both sure and dead. Thus went the second round of the shooting, and thus the third and last, till even Gilbert of the White Hand was fairly beaten. During all this shooting Robin exchanged no word with his men, each treating the other as a perfect stranger. Natheless, such great shooting could not pass without revealing the archers. The sheriff thought he discovered, in the winner of the golden arrow, the person of Robin Hood without peradventure. So he sent word privately for his men-at-arms to close round the group, but Robin's men also got wind of the plan. To keep up appearances, the sheriff summoned the crowd to form in a circle, and after as much delay as possible the arrow was presented. The delay gave time enough for the soldiers to close in. As Robin received his prize, bowed awkwardly, and turned away, the sheriff, letting his zeal get the better of his discretion, grasped him about the neck and called upon his men to arrest the traitor. But the moment the sheriff touched Robin, he received such a buffet on the side of his head that he let go instantly and fell back several paces. Turning to see who had struck him, he recognized Little John. "Ah, rascal Greenleaf, I have you now!" he exclaimed, springing at him. Just then, however, he met a new check. "This is from another of your devoted servants," said a voice which he knew to be that of Much the miller's son, and thwack went his open palm upon the sheriff's cheek, sending that worthy rolling over and over upon the ground. By this time the conflict had become general, but the sheriff's men suffered the disadvantage of being hampered by the crowd of innocent onlookers, whom they could not tell from the outlaws, and so dared not attack, while the other outlaws in the rear fell upon them and put them in confusion. For a moment a fierce rain of blows ensued, then the clear bugle note from Robin ordered a retreat. The two warders at the nearest gate tried to close it, but were shot dead in their tracks. David of Doncaster threw a third soldier into the moat, and out through the gate went the foresters in good order, keeping a respectful distance between themselves and the advancing soldiery, by means of their well-directed shafts. But the fight was not to go easily this day, for the soldiery, smarting from their recent discomfiture at the widow's cottage, and knowing that the eyes of the whole shire were upon them, fought well, and pressed closely after the retreating outlaws. More than one ugly wound was given and received. No less than 5 of the sheriff's men were killed outright, and a dozen others injured, while 4 of Robin's men were bleeding from severe flesh cuts. Then Little John, who had fought by the side of his chief, suddenly fell forward with a slight moan. An arrow had pierced his knee. Robin seized the big fellow with almost superhuman strength. Up he took him on his back, and bare him well a mile. Many a time he laid him down and shot another while. Meanwhile Little John grew weaker and closed his eyes. At last he sank to the ground and feebly motioned Robin to let him lie. "Master Robin," said he, "have I not served you well, ever since we met upon the bridge?" "Truer servant never man had," answered Robin. "Then if ever you loved me, and for the sake of that service, draw your bright brown sword and strike off my head. Never let me fall alive into the hand of the Sheriff of Nottingham. Not for all the gold in England would I do either of the things you suggest." "God forbid!" cried Arthur a Bland, hurrying to the rescue, and packing his wounded kinsman upon his broad shoulders, he soon brought him within the shelter of the forest. Once there, the sheriff's men did not follow, and Robin caused litters of boughs to be made for Little John and the other 4 wounded men. Quickly were they carried through the wood until the hermitage of Friar Tuck was reached, where their wounds were dressed. Little John's hurt was pronounced to be the most serious of any, but he was assured that in 2 or 3 weeks' time he could get about again, whereat the active giant groaned mightily. That evening consternation came upon the hearts of the band. A careful roll call was taken to see if all the yeomen had escaped, when it was found that Will Stuteley was missing, and Maid Marian also was nowhere to be found. Robin was seized with dread. He knew that Marian had gone to the fair, but felt that she would hardly come to grief. Her absence, however, portended some danger, and he feared that it was connected with Will Stuteley. The sheriff would hang him speedily and without mercy if he were captured. The rest of the band shared their leader's uneasiness, though they said no word. They knew that if Will were captured, the battle must be fought over again the next day, and Will must be saved at any cost, but no man flinched from the prospect. That evening, while the sheriff and his wife and daughter sat at meat in the mansion house, the sheriff boasted of how he would make an example of the captured outlaw, for Stuteley had indeed fallen into his hands. "He shall be strung high," he said in a loud voice, "and none shall dare lift a finger. I now have Robin Hood's men on the run, and we shall soon see who is master in this shire. I am only sorry that we let them have the golden arrow." As he spoke, a missive sped through a window and fell clattering upon his plate, causing him to spring back in alarm. It was the golden arrow, and on its feathered shaft was sewed a little note which read, "This from one who will take no gifts from liars, and who henceforth will show no mercy. Look well to yourself. R. H." So ends Chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How Will Stuteley was rescued. Forth of the greenwood are they gone, yea, all courageously, resolving to bring Stuteley home, or every man to die. The next day dawned bright and sunny. The whole face of nature seemed gay, as if in despite of the tragedy which was soon to take place in the walls of Nottingham town. The gates were not opened upon this day, for the sheriff was determined to carry through the hanging of Will Stuteley undisturbed. No man therefore was to be allowed entrance from without, all that morning and until after the fatal hour of noon, when Will's soul was to be launched into eternity. Early in the day Robin had drawn his men to a point, as near as he dared, in the wood where he could watch the road leading to the east gate. He himself was clad in a bright scarlet dress, while his men, a goodly array, wore their suits of sober Lincoln green. They were armed with broadswords, and each man carried his bow and a full quiver of new arrows, straightened and sharpened cunningly by Middle the tinker. Over their greenwood dress each man had thrown a rough mantle, making him look not unlike a friar. "I hold it good, comrades," then said Robin Hood, "to tarry here in hiding for a season, while we sent some one forth to obtain tidings. For in sooth 'twill work no good to march upon the gates if they be closed." "Look, master," quoth one of the widow's sons, "there comes a palmer along the road from the town. Belike he can tell us how the land ties, and if Stuteley be really in jeopardy. Shall I go out and engage him in speech?" "Go," answered Robin. So stout Will went out from the band while the others hid themselves and waited. When he had come closer to the palmer, who seemed a slight youngish fellow, he doffed his hat full courteously and said, "I crave your pardon, holy man, but can you tell me tidings of Nottingham town? Do they intend to put an outlaw to death this day?" "Yea," answered the palmer sadly, "'tis true enough. Sorry be the day. I have passed the very spot where the gallows tree is going up. 'Tis out upon the roadway near the sheriff's castle. One Will Stuteley is to be hung thereon at noon, and I could not bear the sight, so came away." The palmer spoke in a muffled voice, and as his hood was pulled well over his head, stout Will could not discern what manner of man he was. Over his shoulder he carried a long staff, with the fashion of a little cross at one end, and he had sandaled feet like any monk. Stout Will noticed idly that the feet were very small and white, but gave no second thought to the matter. "Who will shrive the poor wretch if you have come away from him?" he asked reproachfully. The question seemed to put a new idea into the palmer's head. He turned so quickly that he almost dropped his hood. "Do you think I should undertake this holy office?" "By Saint Peter and the Blessed Virgin, I do indeed. Else who will do it? The bishop and all his whining clerks may be there, but not one would say a prayer for his soul." "But I am only a poor palmer," the other began hesitatingly. "Natheless, your prayers are as good as any and better than some," replied Will. "Right gladly will I go, then," said the palmer, "but I fear me I cannot get into the city. You may know that the gates are fast locked for this morning, to all who would come in, although they let any pass out who will." "Come with me," said stout Will, "and my master will see that you pass through the gates." So the palmer pulled his cloak still closer about him and was brought before Robin Hood, to whom he told all he knew of the situation. He ended with, "If I may make so bold, I would not try to enter the city from this gate, as 'tis closely guarded since yesterday, but on the far side no attack is looked for." "My thanks, gentle palmer," quoth Robin. "Your suggestion is good, and we will deploy to the gate upon the far side." So the men marched silently but quickly until they were near to the western gate. Then Arthur a Bland asked leave to go ahead as a scout, and quietly made his way to a point under the tower by the gate. The moat was dry on this side, as these were times of peace, and Arthur was further favored by a stout ivy vine which grew out from an upper window. Swinging himself up boldly by means of this friendly vine, he crept through the window, and in a moment more had sprung upon the warder from behind and grabbed him hard about the throat. The warder had no chance to utter the slightest sound, and soon lay bound and gagged upon the floor, while Arthur a Bland slipped himself into his uniform and got hold of his keys. 'Twas the work of but a few moments more to open the gates, let down the bridge, and admit the rest of the band, and they got inside the town so quietly that none knew of their coming. Fortune also favored them in the fact that just at this moment the prison doors had been opened for the march of the condemned man, and every soldier and idle lout in the market-place had trooped thither to see him pass along. Presently out came Will Stuteley, with firm step but dejected air. He looked eagerly to the right hand and to the left, but saw none of the band, and though more than one curious face betrayed friendship in it, he knew there could be no aid from such source. Will's hands were tied behind his back. He marched between rows of soldiery, and the sheriff and the bishop brought up the rear on horses, looking mightily puffed up and important over the whole proceeding. He would show these sturdy rebels, would the sheriff, whose word was law. He knew that the gates were tightly fastened, and further he believed that the outlaws would hardly venture again within the walls, even if the gates were open. And as he looked around at the 50 archers and pikemen who lined the way to the gallows, he smiled with grim satisfaction. Seeing that no help was nigh, the prisoner paused at the foot of the scaffold and spoke in a firm tone to the sheriff. "My lord sheriff," quoth he, "since I must needs die, grant me one boon, for my noble master ne'er yet had a man that was hanged on a tree. Give me a sword all in my hand, and let me be unbound, and with thee and thy men will I fight, till I lie dead on the ground." But the sheriff would by no means listen to his request, but swore that he should be hanged a shameful death, and not die by the sword valiantly. "Oh, no, no, no," the sheriff said, "thou shalt on the gallows die. Aye, and so shall thy master too, if ever it in me lie." "O dastard coward," Stuteley cried, "faint-hearted peasant slave, if ever my master do thee meet, thou shalt thy payment have. My noble master thee doth scorn, and all thy cowardly crew, such silly imps unable are, bold Robin to subdue." This brave speech was not calculated to soothe the sheriff. "To the gallows with him!" he roared, giving a sign to the hangman, and Stuteley was pushed into the rude cart which was to bear him under the gallows until his neck was leashed. Then the cart would be drawn roughly away, and the unhappy man would swing out over the tail of it into another world. But at this moment came a slight interruption. A boyish-looking palmer stepped forth and said, "Your Excellency, let me at least shrive this poor wretch's soul ere it be hurled into eternity." "No," shouted the sheriff, "let him die a dog's death." "Then this damnation will rest upon you," said the monk firmly. "You, my lord bishop, cannot stand by and see this wrong done." The bishop hesitated. Like the sheriff, he wanted no delay, but the people were beginning to mutter among themselves and move about uneasily. He said a few words to the sheriff, and the latter nodded to the monk ungraciously. "Perform your duty, sir priest," quoth he, "and be quick about it." Then turning to his soldiers, "Watch this palmer narrowly," he commanded. Belike he is in league with those rascally outlaws." But the palmer paid no heed to his last words. He began to tell his beads quickly, and to speak in a low voice to the condemned man, but he did not touch his bonds. Then came another stir in the crowd, and one came pushing through the press of people and soldiery to come near to the scaffold. "I pray you, Will, before you die, take leave of all your friends," cried out the well-known voice of Much, the miller's son. At the word, the palmer stepped back suddenly and looked to one side. The sheriff also knew the speaker. "Seize him!" he shouted. "'Tis another of the crew. He is the villain cook who once did rob me of my silver plate. We'll make a double hanging of this." "Not so fast, good master sheriff," retorted Much. "First catch your man and then hang him. But meanwhile I would like to borrow my friend of you a while." And with one stroke of his keen hunting knife he cut the bonds which fastened the prisoner's arms, and Stuteley leaped lightly from the cart. "Treason!" screamed the sheriff, getting black with rage. "Catch the varlets!" So saying, he spurred his horse fiercely forward, and rising in his stirrups, brought down his sword with might and main at Much's head. But his former cook dodged nimbly underneath the horse and came up on the other side, while the weapon whistled harmlessly in the air. "Nay, Sir Sheriff," he cried, "I must e'en borrow your sword for the friend I have borrowed." Thereupon he snatched the weapon deftly from the sheriff's hand. "Here, Stuteley," said he, "the sheriff has lent you his own sword. Back to back with me, man, and we'll teach these knaves a trick or two." Meanwhile the soldiers had recovered from their momentary surprise and had flung themselves into the fray. A clear bugle note had also sounded the same, which the soldiers had learned to dread. 'Twas the rallying note of the greenwood men. Cloth-yard shafts began to hurtle through the air, and Robin and his men cast aside their cloaks and sprang forward, crying, "Locksley! Locksley! A rescue! A rescue!" On the instant a terrible scene of hand-to-hand fighting followed. The sheriff's men, though once more taken by surprise, were determined to sell this rescue dearly. They packed in closely and stubbornly about the condemned man and Much and the palmer, and it was only by desperate rushes that the foresters made an opening in the square. Ugly cuts and bruises were exchanged freely, and lucky was the man who escaped with only these. Many of the onlookers, who had long hated the sheriff and felt sympathy for Robin's men, also plunged into the conflict, although they could not well keep out of it in sooth, and aided the rescuers no little. At last, with a mighty onrush, Robin cleaved a way through the press to the scaffold itself, and not a second too soon, for two men with pikes had leaped upon the cart and were in the act of thrusting down upon the palmer and Will Stuteley. A mighty upward blow from Robin's good blade sent the pike flying from the hand of one, while a well-directed arrow from the outskirt pierced the other fellow's throat. "God save you, master," cried Will Stuteley joyfully. "I had begun to fear that I would never see your face again." "A rescue!" shouted the outlaws afresh, and the soldiery became faint-hearted and began to give back. But the field was not yet won, for they retreated in close order toward the east gate, resolved to hem the attackers within the city walls. Here again, however, they were in error, since the outlaws did not go out by their nearest gate. They made a sally in that direction in order to mislead the soldiery, then abruptly turned and headed for the west gate, which was still guarded by Arthur a Bland. The sheriff's men raised an exultant shout at this, thinking that they had the enemy trapped. Down they charged after them, but the outlaws made good their lead, and soon got through the gate and over the bridge which had been let down by Arthur a Bland. Close upon their heels came the soldiers, so close that Arthur had no time to close the gate again or raise the bridge. So he threw away his key and fell in with the yeomen, who now began their retreat up the long hill to the woods. On this side the town, the road leading to the forest was long and almost unprotected. The greenwood men were therefore in some distress, for the archers shot at them from loopholes in the walls, and the pikemen were reinforced by a company of mounted men from the castle. But the outlaws retreated stubbornly, and now and again turned to hold their pursuers at bay by a volley of arrows. Stuteley was in their midst, fighting with the energy of two, and the little palmer was there also, but took no part save to keep close to Robin's side and mutter silent words as though in prayer. Robin put his horn to his lips to sound a rally, when a flying arrow from the enemy pierced his hand. The palmer gave a little cry and sprang forward. The sheriff, who followed close with the men on horseback, also saw the wound and gave a great huzzah. "Ha!" "You will shoot no more bows for a season, Master Outlaw," he shouted. "You lie," retorted Robin fiercely, wrenching the shaft from his hand despite the streaming blood. "I have saved one shot for you all this day. Here, take it." And he fitted the same arrow, which had wounded him, upon the string of his bow and let it fly toward the Sheriff's head. The Sheriff fell forward upon his horse in mortal terror, but not so quickly as to escape unhurt. The sharp point laid a bare, deep gash upon his scalp, and must certainly have killed him if it had come closer. The fall of the Sheriff discomfited his followers for the moment, and Robin's men took this chance to speed on up the hill. The palmer had whipped out a small white handkerchief and tried to staunch Robin's wound as they went. At sight of the palmer's hand, Robin turned with a start and pushed back the other's hood. "Marian!" he exclaimed. "You here!" It was indeed Maid Marian, who had helped save Will, and been in the stress of battle from the first. Now she hung her head as though caught in wrong. "I had to come, Robin," she said simply, "and I knew you would not let me come else." Their further talk was interrupted by an exclamation from Will Scarlet. "By the saints, we are trapped," he said, and pointed to the top of the hill toward which they were pressing. There from out a gray castle poured a troop of men armed with pikes and axes, who shouted and came running down upon them. At the same instant the Sheriff's men also renewed the pursuit. "Alas!" cried poor Marian, "we are undone. There is no way of escape." "Courage, dear heart," said Robin, drawing her close to him, but his own spirit sank as he looked about for some outlet. Then, oh joyful sight, he recognized among the foremost of those coming from the castle the once doleful knight, Sir Richard of the Laigh. He was smiling now and greatly excited. "A hood! A hood!" he cried. "A rescue! A rescue!" Never were there more welcome sights and sounds than these. With a great cheer the outlaws raced up the hill to meet their new friends, and soon the whole force had gained the shelter of the castle. Bang went the bridge as it swung back, with great clanking of chains. Clash went one great door upon the other as they shut in the outlaw band and shut out the Sheriff, who dashed up at the head of his men, his bandaged face streaked with blood and inflamed with rage. So ends chapter 20.